What's up folks, Cody with Chasing Roost, and today I'm going to go through and I'm going to change the hydraulic fluid in the clutch, the brakes, the front and back, and some brake pads. One of the things I'll be doing is moving this clutch perch up to level out this master cylinder. Go ahead and mark that so I don't have to find it later. So I'm just going to take and scratch a little line on that. So we'll turn the handlebars to the right in this case to leave the master cylinder at the highest point it possibly could be. And then I want to get here and make sure that it's leveled out as well. So I'm losing the least amount of fluid as possible. That's again why I marked it. So just kind of tighten that loosely there. Now we need the Torx bits on that. I believe those are T20s. Little dingy. I don't know if you can see that, but that diaphragm looks pretty gunked up and gross too. So probably a good thing we're changing this. I definitely put it through a lot of abuse. Pull out the old fluid. That way we're not having to flush all that out. We can skip some steps there. So pull out that old fluid there. Just gonna flush that into a cup. Take a blue paper towel and just take a little piece of it and just kind of dab some of that remaining junk out of there. Just make it easier to flush later. Remember that you don't want to get any brake fluid on any painted surfaces. It is highly corrosive. I don't know if corrosive is the right word, but it definitely eats away at stuff. So I want to make sure you don't get that on anything. If you do, it's not the end of the world. Just use some rubbing alcohol. Just clean that off. That's not painted, that's actually anodized, so it probably wouldn't hurt it too bad. But regardless, I don't want to mess up my stuff. And now with a clean syringe, go ahead and refill that reservoir. It doesn't take very much to get to the point where you get up here to the top. That just gives you a place to start from. It's also a great idea to just tie off a rag around the edge of this reservoir, because that fluid will leak out of there. So we can just have that waiting for it to drip. Then it doesn't drip all over everything. It drips on the rag. Kind of a nice little bonus tip. How about that? We always want to keep an eye on this fluid level to make sure that it doesn't fall below the bottom of this reservoir, because then we'll just be introducing air into the line and fighting that later on. I have this Motion Pro bleeder tool. It's basically a hose with a one-way check valve in between. So that way when the fluid gets down past here, it can't suck air back in and reintroduce air into your system. But you'll put the other end of, even if you just have a regular hose, no big deal. Works essentially the same way. This is kind of just an extra fail-safe. But you put the other end of the hose into a bottle or a pop can or something just to reclaim this fluid so it's not just going all over the ground, making a mess. So I've already removed the cap that goes over this bleed port here. We're going to put the wrench over the top of that, and then we put in our hose. A little cold out, my hose shrunk. The idea that I'm having here is that if I zip tie this to my foot peg, I don't have to worry about managing the bottle too. We'll see if that idea holds true or not. It's something. This one, theoretically, gravity will do the work for you. So if you're able to open that bleed valve an eighth to a quarter turn, and then you should just be able to watch the top. And once gravity takes over, it'll kind of bleed itself. We're not necessarily bleeding so much right now as we are flushing. So what's in the top will end up in the bottom, and once it comes out clean and we're happy with it, just check and make sure that it works and we're good to go. I believe we sufficiently flushed the system, so now I'm going to go in here and tighten that back up. Don't go too tight, you don't want to twist that off in there. And then we're just going to feel what our lever feels like. It's pretty spongy right now. However, if you look up in here, you can see some air coming out of the top, and that is perfectly fine. That's what we're shooting for. So once we get this air coming out the top and it stops making air bubbles, then that means that we're sufficiently bled. All right, so I'm just doing these small movements here. And I'm starting to get some lever feel back in here. Every time I do, it's getting a little bit better. So flushing and bleeding your brakes, to me, it's one of those things that people overcomplicate. So I certainly overcomplicated it for a long time. Flushing is, I mean, as it sounds, you're putting fresh fluid in and flushing out the old fluid with the fresh fluid. And then bleeding it is just getting the air out of the lines. In this case, air is going to just try to escape going up out of the line, so it usually kind of bleeds itself out. So with the bottom line closed, it only has one place to go, and that's up and out of here. So as long as we have a place for it to go, it'll come out. Sometimes you just got to give it a little bit of patience. You see some air still coming out here. And as I go, my lever's feeling better and better. Some other things that you can do is you can kind of just tap on the line here, all throughout that line. As you do that, you potentially find some air will come out of just doing that alone. Just grab it at different places throughout the line and do that. Particularly when you're doing front brakes, that's a big one. Just try to work that air out of that line. Kind of see that bubble up out there? That's just hydraulic pressure, and that means we're getting really stinking close. Really stiff now, so that's doing good. You see that's really jumping out of there. All right, so with that jumping out like it is, our next thing we're gonna wanna do is put that little cap back in, right? This little guy back in here. So that's just protect that from doing a whole lot there. That air that just came out there was really what was trapped under that cap when I put it in. We'll keep doing that for a minute, but right now it feels really, really good. Some good pops. We'll just add to our final level. If you can see this little line right here, that's where we're going to. We don't want to fill it all the way to the top of the cap, or there won't be any room for a rubber diaphragm. You do want to clean this before you put it back in. I wouldn't use anything super harsh, but some rubbing alcohol should do just fine. I like to keep some with a little spray bottle attachment on the top. It's amazing how much this brake fluid will break down. So another thing is brake fluid is hygroscopic, which means that it attracts moisture, so it attracts water essentially, which is how you end up with some of that weird gross debris in there. And it also breaks down over time, especially with heat cycles and things like that. So it's good to replace it. Keeps you from having that brake fade, or in this case, clutch fade, I suppose. With that cleaned off, we can put this back together. Just throw our diaphragm in there. As you can see, if you get a little too full, it'll weep out. Put the cap back on. You do not want to get these too tight. Just lightly snug them. Since we're going to be moving some of our positions, I'm going to scratch a little mark where I was, so I don't have to figure that out later. Put my controls right back where they were. Loosen off my controls a little bit so I can put them where I want them for this job. Okay, and I do want my reservoir to be at the highest point I can. So we'll kind of level this guy out here. With the T20, we'll take the cap off. Curious what this looks like in here. Not as bad as the clutch, but it doesn't get used as much as the clutch does. We'll clean out the old fluid. Fresh syringe and some fresh fluid will fill that guy up. Let's remove this little cap. I like to take it all the way off just so I don't have to fool with it. Use some redneck ingenuity here, and I'm going to try to zip tie this bottle onto this thing somehow. How about that? Okay. We'll want to put the wrench on there first, or it will not fit. This one's an 8 out of 7. That's fun. Throw the wrench on there. Hose. Experiencing some shrinkage here in the Chasing Roost garage. A little chilly. All right, that's a nice fit now. A little warm up. We'll just open this guy up here. You see that fluid's already coming out of there. So that is a good sign. Keep that top reservoir topped off so we don't actually introduce air into the line. That will be in good shape. Close this. Give it a few pumps. And that already feels really good. Flushing the system is easier than doing a fresh bleed, as if you were like replacing a hose or something of that nature, just because ideally you wouldn't be introducing any new air, you'd just be putting fresh fluid through. So if you did it right, you wouldn't have introduced any extra air. I'm going to push on the brake caliper from the side, and that will push the pads out slightly, which would release any air that's trapped inside of this master cylinder. It's kind of back flush. And you do want to make sure that you hit the brakes again. So reseat that caliper. Making sure one last check, make sure no air bubbles are coming out of here. Tap the hoses. And that is rock hard. All right, we'll tip this little cap back into place where it was. And then top off that reservoir, and we are done. Again, this one has a little fill line on it as well, so you don't want to overfill this. Right there. Really lightly seat those. You don't want to tighten those down too hard because small threads that would definitely pull out pretty easily. What size is that big boy? Bigger than I got. Oh, unfortunately, I don't have one that big. It's not bad. Just kind of stuff a rag down in there. Helps me to pull out some of that old fluid. Pump, pump, pump. Hold. Open slightly. Feel that pedal drop. Once it stops pushing fluid, close the line. Pump, 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 pump. Hold. When you open the line, the pedal will drop a little bit. Once it drops, close the line. Keep doing that. Make sure that you fill that fluid level back up. You're pushing a lot of fluid pretty quickly. And just continue doing that till you know we flush the system. So pump, 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 hold, open, close, pump, 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 hold, open, close, release, pump, 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 hold the pedal, open the line slightly, let the pedal drop. When it's fully dropped, close the line, release the pedal. By pumping the line like that, helps to build the pressure up. Also, you can't compress fluid, but you can compress air, so that makes the air go to the path of least resistance, which is out. So it basically puts it right out here towards the end, so whenever we do open this, your air pockets will come out, free any air that's trapped in the line. So that feels really good. Fluid that's coming out of here is clear, fresh fluid. So we're just going to make sure that we're topped off in here. The line for that is pretty much just in line with the top of this sight glass, but you can see a line on the inside of this as well. We can back bleed this line just to make sure that there's nothing else in here. So what we would do is just push on the caliper here. That forces that piston to open up. And if there's any air that's trapped in the line, it'll get forced out the top up here. There was not. We'll put our lid back on. Never fails. Seems like the line where it's supposed to be is still too full. You don't need to get this thing super tight. Slightly more than hand tight. Shame on me for not having the right size wrench for that. And that's it. We're done here. I'm going to show you the quick and dirty on rear brake pad swap on a late model KTM. Start by pushing the caliper to the side. That frees up your brake pads, so you have room to remove those in a minute. Needle nose pliers, you can pull these clips out. Those are what holds your pin in. Slide our pin out of place. We'll want to clean that before we put it back in. Now we can remove our old brake pads. To clean the pin off, I just use some brake cleaner and some Scotch-Brite pad. So now we can take and set these pads into place. Make sure that this foot right here, I suppose you could call it, is sitting on the ledge. If it's misplaced, it won't work quite right. It'll get in a bind and tear some stuff up. Get that line in there, sitting on that ledge correctly. Then you can push the pad over with that there and do that for the side on the inside. Once that one's in place, you can put your pin back in, put a little light layer of grease on that, just keep it moving. Put the pin back in, and we can put our little pins back on there. Remember to pump your brake pedal back up when you're done. Also, it's a good idea before you go riding again to burnish the pads in, which means that as you ride along at kind of a slow pace, you lightly drag the brakes, which will help the pads mate to the disc. All right, folks, that wraps up our maintenance day. We covered clutch and brake fluid flushes, plus a quick rear brake pad swap on the KTM. Remember, fluid maintenance isn't as complicated as people make it out to be, but it is critical to keep your bike working right. Just take your time, keep an eye on those fluid levels, and don't over-tighten anything. If you found this helpful, hit that subscribe button and follow along with Chasing Roost for more dirt bike maintenance tips and riding content. Drop a comment if you've got any questions, and we'll catch you on the next ride.